Welcome back to Simplified Reads. Before we dive into the next section of Invisible Power, let's quickly revisit what we've already explored. In Chapter 1, we discovered that true influence begins in silence. It's not about saying more, it's about listening better and letting presence speak louder than persuasion. Chapter 2 unpacked the psychology of yes. It's not pressure or charm that earns agreement, but alignment, when people feel like the decision is their own, not something imposed. Chapter 3 revealed the power of nonverbal persuasion, how posture, tone, and presence often influence people before a word is even spoken. Chapter 4 taught us that listening isn't passive. It's the most powerful act of connection. By simply hearing someone without judgment, you can open hearts and build trust. And in Chapter 5, we learned the difference between confidence and ego. Real charisma doesn't shout. It draws people in with grounded presence and humble strength. Today's video will cover the next 6 chapters, starting with Chapter 6, The Invisible Mirror, where we'll explore how the most powerful influencers make people feel deeply seen. So if you're ready, let's keep going. Chapter 6, The Invisible Mirror, making people feel seen. Imagine this. You're deep in a conversation, and you suddenly realize you've been talking for 15 minutes. Not because you're self-absorbed, but because the person across from you made you feel truly safe. Their eyes weren't darting to their phone. Their posture didn't scream, "Get to the point." They were just there, present, interested. That's what it feels like to be seen. Not judged, not evaluated, but seen. It's rare, isn't it? Most interactions feel transactional, like we're trading sound bites, waiting for our turn to speak. But when someone listens without a script, when their silence isn't empty but respectful, something changes. You leave lighter. You didn't just talk, you were heard. That's the foundation of invisible influence. It doesn't come from flashy gestures. It comes from making people feel safe to be themselves. We often think influence is about impressing others, saying the right thing at the right moment. But some of the most influential people say very little, and yet leave us changed. Why? Because their energy communicates, "I see you. You matter." That kind of energy isn't taught in sales seminars. It's born from mindfulness, empathy, and genuine attention. Consider Lisa, a mid-level manager at a company during a massive layoff. While other departments crumbled under pressure, Lisa's team stayed loyal. Not because she promised them safety, but because she made time for each person. One-on-one, eye-to-eye, not just to deliver updates, but to hold space. "How are you really doing?" she'd ask. That question, asked without urgency, was what made the difference. The invisible mirror isn't a technique. It's a posture. It's the way you reflect someone's worth back to them, without stealing the light for yourself. You don't say, "Look at me." You say, "I see you." That reflection can change how someone sees themselves, and it costs you nothing but presence. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a conversation is nothing. Let the silence stretch. Let them fill it with their truth. Influence doesn't always need a clever reply. Sometimes it just needs space, emotional oxygen. When you stop trying to control the moment, you give others the freedom to expand in it. Here's a real-world example. Marcus was a junior associate. No fancy title, no authority. But the senior partners kept requesting him for meetings. Why? Because afterward, he'd approach them with genuine curiosity. How did you navigate that pushback from the client? What helped you stay calm in that moment? He wasn't networking, he was learning. And in doing so, he made others feel respected. And so they respected him back. You don't need a decade-long friendship to make someone feel seen. Sometimes 5 minutes of real attention is all it takes. Ask, why was that important to you? Or what was that moment like for you? Then just listen, really listen. When people realize you're not waiting to impress, they start revealing who they really are. Here's a phrase to carry with you. That sounds important to you. It's not complicated. but hits deep because most people don't hear that, even from those closest to them. That one sentence tells them, "I'm not just hearing you, I care about what matters to you." And when people feel seen, they change. Not because you changed them, but because you held space for them to change themselves. That's real influence. It doesn't require a pitch. It doesn't need a slide deck. It just requires presence, reflection, and care. The invisible mirror doesn't manipulate. It invites. It whispers, "You're not invisible here." And in a world full of noise and filters, that kind of attention is revolutionary. The irony? The more you reflect others, the more they reflect back in loyalty, in trust, and in connection. Chapter 7, Power in the Pause, Mastering Timing and Silence. Have you ever noticed how silence sometimes speaks louder than words? Think of a moment when someone dropped a truth so heavy it didn't need an explanation. The words ended, but the impact didn't. That space afterward, where everyone held their breath, that's the power of the pause. Influence isn't just about what you say. It's about when you say it, and just as often when you don't. In a world addicted to speed, the pause is rebellion. It signals clarity, confidence, and intention. You're not rushing to fill space. You're letting your words land. We often feel uncomfortable with silence. We mistake it for weakness, for awkwardness, for not knowing what to say. So we fill it with nervous laughter, with filler words, with rambling. But here's the truth. Silence reveals your confidence more than words ever could. Think of someone who responds to tension not with panic, but with poise. Who hears criticism and responds with breath, not defense. That's influence, not in dominance, but in discipline. Timing isn't manipulation, it's mastery. It's knowing when to let things breathe and when to speak with intention. When you pause, you let others catch up, reflect, and truly feel the moment. There's also power in the silence you give others. In conversations, when you pause after someone shares, you offer them space to expand, to clarify, to reveal what they weren't planning to say. People often speak more deeply when they're not being rushed. A therapist doesn't guide with speeches, they guide with silence. So do great parents, leaders, and friends. It's not just about listening, it's about creating room. Pauses act like emotional commas. They give people permission to keep going or to rest. Either way, you're giving them control, and that builds trust. Emma, a project leader I once coached, learned this the hard way. In team meetings, she always spoke first, out of enthusiasm, but her ideas got ignored. So she tried a new tactic. Wait, let everyone speak, then speak last. Something changed. Her words started carrying weight, not because they were better, but because people were finally ready to hear them. That's timing. That's restraint. Emma didn't just become more respected, she became more trusted. People leaned in when she finally spoke because her silence had built anticipation. Influence isn't always in volume. Often it's in rhythm. And don't forget, this works digitally too. In a world of instant replies, a thoughtful pause in a message can communicate care. Hey, I read your note. I want to think about it and get back to you. That kind of pause builds trust. It says, you matter enough for me to slow down. Silence, in any form, is a boundary. It tells the world, I don't react out of habit. I respond with intention. It's the pause between reaction and response that separates influence from impulse. That's what people follow. So here's your next tool, pause. Pause before speaking. Pause before replying. Pause before reacting. Let silence become your ally, not your enemy. Because when you master the pause, you master yourself. And when people sense that self-control, that grounded energy, they listen. Not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. Chapter 8, The Language of Authenticity, Speaking Without Masks. Let's talk about a word we often hear, but rarely understand, authenticity. We throw it around like a compliment. He's so real, she's down to earth. they speak from the heart. But what does that actually mean? And how does being authentic make you more influential? Here's the truth. Authenticity is not a performance. It's the quiet alignment between what you say and what you really feel. It's the courage to show up without a mask, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Most people walk through life slightly edited. They smile when they don't mean it. They nod in agreement while biting their tongue. They hold back what they want to say, just in case it's too much or not professional or not likable. And little by little, that habit of hiding becomes identity. They forget who they were before the masks. But authenticity isn't about oversharing. It's not about putting every raw thought on display. It's about something much simpler and far more powerful, being congruent. When your outer voice matches your inner truth, people feel safe around you. They don't have to decode you. They don't have to guess what you mean or wonder if you're hiding something. You create clarity, emotional clarity, and clarity invites trust. Think of someone who owns their awkwardness instead of covering it up. Think of the boss who says, "I made a mistake. Let's fix it together," instead of spinning excuses. Think of the friend who doesn't pretend to have it all together, but shows up anyway. These are the people we remember, not because they dazzled us, but because they let us be real too. Authenticity isn't charisma, it's permission. When you show up as yourself, you give others permission to do the same. And in a world starving for that kind of safety, your realness becomes rare and magnetic. Carlos, the salesperson we mentioned earlier, didn't close deals because he followed scripts. He closed deals because he broke them. When a client asked, "Is this the best product out there?" he'd answer, "It's not for everyone." But here's where it shines. That sentence, simple as it was, disarmed people. It made them trust him. Why? Because it sounded like a human, not a pitch. Clients don't want a flawless answer. They want an honest one. And honesty doesn't weaken your message, it anchors it. Zero, even outside of sales, this rule applies. A teacher who says, "I'm learning too," earns more respect than one who pretends to have all the answers. A leader who says, "I don't know, but I'll find out," builds more trust than one who bluffs. Because authenticity isn't about being right, it's about being real. Now, that doesn't mean you abandon professionalism. It means you bring your full humanity into it. You could be composed and still vulnerable. You could be strategic and still honest. You don't need to choose between strength and softness. The most powerful communicators blend both. But here's the tricky part. Being authentic takes practice. Because we've spent years, sometimes decades, learning to wear the mask. We've been praised for playing roles. The good student, the charming speaker, the tough boss. And taking off the mask, even in small ways, can feel terrifying. What if they don't like the real me? What if I lose respect? What if my vulnerability is used against me? These are valid fears, but they come from old stories. Stories built on the belief that being yourself isn't enough. And the only way to break those stories is to tell new ones. Start small. In your next conversation, be honest about what you're unsure of. In your next meeting, speak slower and only say what you really mean. In your next disagreement, say, "This matters to me," instead of trying to win the argument. Each moment you do that, you reclaim a little piece of yourself, and others will feel it. Because here's the paradox. When you stop performing, people pay closer attention. When you speak without trying to impress, your words hit deeper. When you drop the script, people lean in, not because they're entertained, but because they're moved. People are tired of slick, tired of spin. They want connection. They want something and someone they can trust. And trust doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from being consistent, present, and sincere. Think about someone who changed your life. Chances are, it wasn't their resume that moved you. It was their honesty, their presence, their ability to say, "Me too," when you felt alone. That's invisible power. It doesn't sell, it invites. It doesn't dominate, it draws in. It doesn't manipulate, it connects. So next time you speak, ask yourself, Am I being honest? Am I hiding? Am I performing? And then ask, what would it feel like to just be me? You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. You just have to be the clearest. And clarity doesn't come from control. It comes from alignment. When your truth, your tone, and your presence all say the same thing. That's when people listen. That's when they follow. Not because you persuaded them, but because you reminded them of their own truth. So speak from where it's real. Let people hear your you. Because authenticity isn't the end of influence. It's the beginning of trust. Chapter 9, Listening Beyond Words. There's a kind of listening that doesn't involve ears. It happens when someone sighs instead of speaks, when they choose silence over explanation, when their smile fades just a little too fast. This kind of listening isn't taught in school. It lives in the space between what is said and what is felt. It's the ability to hear pain in laughter, to sense hesitation in a yes, to know when someone is saying, "I'm fine," and not mean it. Most of us listen with a goal, to respond, to advise, to fix. But listening beyond words has no agenda. It's not about reply. It's about awareness. You're not solving a puzzle. You're holding a mirror. You're watching for the moment their words and their truth slip out of sync, and choosing not to correct them, but to care for them anyway. Think about someone in your life who listens like this. They don't interrupt. They don't rush you. They don't try to summarize your feelings into bullet points. Instead, they watch. They feel. They hold space. That kind of listening changes things, not because it solves problems, but because it honors pain. It says, "I hear the words you're not saying." Let me tell you a story. Dana, a crisis counselor, once told me she was trained to listen for the unsaid. Not just what people said over the phone, but how they said it, their breathing patterns, the pauses, the words they didn't choose. One night, a caller said, "I'm just tired." That's all. Dana didn't say, "You'll be okay." She asked, "Tired like you didn't sleep, or tired like you're done trying?" That question saved a life, because she heard what the caller couldn't say. You don't have to be a professional counselor to listen like that. You just have to be present. Present enough to notice what most people miss. The way someone laughs a little too loudly at a joke. The moment their energy dips after a certain topic. The subtle stiffening of shoulders when someone walks in the room. Emotions are always speaking. The question is, are you quiet enough to hear them? Listening beyond words also means noticing patterns. Maybe your friend always changes the subject when their dad is mentioned. Maybe your coworker shrinks in meetings after being interrupted. These aren't just quirks, they're signals. People protect their wounds without realizing it. And if you're paying attention, you can meet them with gentleness instead of questions. We live in a culture that praises clarity. Say what you mean. Be direct. And yes, that's important. But not everyone grew up in spaces where directness was safe. Some people learn to survive by staying quiet, compliant, agreeable. For them, emotional honesty is a foreign language. And when they try to speak it, their voice trembles. The listener's job isn't to demand fluency, it's to offer grace. Real influence comes when you can listen in layers. Not just what's being said, but what's underneath it. What's been rehearsed, what's being avoided. And here's the secret. When people sense that you're truly hearing them, beyond the surface, they begin to trust you with more. Not because you asked for it, but because you earned it. This isn't about confrontation. It's about compassion. Instead of saying, "You're clearly upset," you say, "I noticed you got quiet. Want to talk about it?" Instead of asking, "Why didn't you tell me?" you say, "I'm here when you're ready." Listening beyond words invites honesty, not through force, but through safety. Let me be clear, this kind of listening is hard. It takes energy. It takes emotional courage. You might feel frustrated. You might feel helpless because you'll hear things you can't fix. But that's okay. People don't always need answers. Sometimes they just need to be witnessed, to have their experience honored, not edited. Start practicing this in small ways. Notice when someone hesitates before answering. when they repeat a phrase, when their body shifts in discomfort. Ask gently or say nothing, and just let your attention be the message. I see you. You don't have to explain everything. I'm here. These are some of the most healing things you'll never say out loud. And remember, not everyone wants to open up right away. That's not rejection. That's protection. Keep showing up. Keep being gentle. Keep listening beyond the words. Because when they are ready to speak, they'll remember who was patient enough to wait. In the end, listening beyond words isn't just a skill. It's a gift that tells people, you don't have to perform here. You don't have to be loud or cheerful or even clear. Just be, and I'll be here with you. That's not manipulation. That's presence. That's not persuasion. That's trust. So ask yourself, who in my life needs to be heard right now without having to explain? And then offer it. Offer your quiet, your stillness, your presence. Because in that silence, people don't feel ignored. They feel held. That's how you influence hearts. Quietly, deeply, invisibly. Chapter 10. Trust as a currency. If influence is a house, trust is the foundation. And like any strong foundation, it's built brick by brick, small actions, quiet consistencies, and invisible choices that compound over time. You might not see trust forming, but you always feel it. And when it's there, things move easier. Conversations flow. Decisions are faster. Resistance drops. Because trust is more than a feeling. It's a form of emotional currency. Trust isn't flashy. It rarely makes noise, but carries weight. Think of the people you rely on without question. The friend you'd call in crisis. The boss whose word you never doubt. The partner who can say, I'll handle it, and you just know they will. What they've earned over time isn't just goodwill, it's credibility, emotional credit. And the more you invest in others' trust banks, the more freedom and influence you gain. But trust isn't built with big moments. It's built in the in-betweens. The I'll call you back that actually happens. The apology that comes without a defense. The promise that's kept without being reminded. It's not about being perfect. It's about being predictable in the best possible way. Let me introduce you to Eli, a mentor I once had. He wasn't particularly loud, didn't have a dazzling resume, but in every meeting he'd ask one question, pause, and then say, let me think on that before I answer. And the next day, every single time, he followed up with clarity and honesty. People started depending on his word, not because he had all the answers, but because he never pretended to. That's what trust looks like. It's not built on charisma. It's built on congruence. When what you say matches what you do, people stop second-guessing you. They lean in. They relax. Because there's no hidden agenda. There's no guessing game. There's just truth and trust. But let's be honest, trust can be fragile. One broken word, one shift in energy, one silent betrayal, and the balance changes. That doesn't mean people expect you to be flawless, but they do expect you to be honest about your flaws. There's a huge difference between making a mistake and covering one up. The first builds humanity. The second builds suspicion. Trust isn't just built when you succeed. Sometimes it's earned most when you admit you didn't. When you say, I got that wrong, or I thought I understood, but I didn't. Can you help me see it? That kind of vulnerability is a deposit, not a withdrawal, because people trust those who can tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Let's talk relationships for a moment. Romantic, professional, or platonic. Every strong one runs on trust. Not attraction, not shared hobbies, not convenience. Trust. When you know someone won't weaponize your vulnerability. When you're not afraid they'll gossip about your hard day. When you know your absence won't be used against you. That's real safety. And safety is the soil where everything good grows. Connection, loyalty, influence, and love. Let's talk relationships for a moment. Romantic, professional, or platonic. Every strong one runs on trust. Not attraction, not shared hobbies, not convenience. Trust. When you know someone won't weaponize your vulnerability. When you're not afraid they'll gossip about your hard day. When you know your absence won't be used against you. That's real safety. And safety is the soil where everything good grows. Connection, loyalty, influence, and love. So how do you become someone who is trusted? Not through perfection, through patterns, consistency, respect, transparency, boundaries honored, secrets kept, truth told kindly. All these are deposits into the trust account. And when you do them not just once, but over and over, they become your brand. Your unspoken message to the world. You can count on me, even when no one's watching. But here's a warning. Trust takes time to build and seconds to break. And once it's broken, influence becomes control. You'll find yourself trying to convince people instead of guiding them, using authority instead of alignment. That's the shift from invisible power to visible pressure. And people feel it. Trust also isn't one size fits all. For some, it's about showing up. For others, it's about listening well. For others still, it's about consistency over years. So ask, what does trust look like for this person? Then meet them there, not to manipulate, but to connect. Multiple doors, each labeled with different trust languages. Presence, consistency, kindness, truth. A person stands in front, choosing one thoughtfully. Let's wrap with this. In a noisy world, trust is quiet. In a world full of noise, trust whispers, you're safe here. And in a world that's increasingly transactional, trust says, this isn't a deal. It's a relationship. So build your influence not on pressure, but on presence. Not on performance, but on truth. Trust is slow magic. But when you carry it, doors open before you even knock. Because at the end of the day, influence without trust is noise. But trust is power. Chapter 11, Emotional Fluency. Reading the room without speaking. Some people walk into a room and instantly know the temperature. Not the one on the thermostat, but the emotional one. They can feel if tension just left the air or is about to enter it. They sense when a joke is welcome or when silence is sacred. They don't need to be told what's going on. They feel it. That's emotional fluency. And it's one of the quietest forms of influence you'll ever carry. You've probably met someone like this. They just get it. Without many words, they know when to speak and when not to. They sense when someone is hurt, even if they're smiling. They notice the sigh at the end of a sentence. The energy shift when a certain name is mentioned. These people influence not because they're persuasive, but because they're present, attuned. Emotional fluency isn't about analyzing. It's about absorbing. It's less about decoding words, more about sensing what's underneath them. You don't ask, what are they saying? You ask, what are they feeling? And then, quietly, you adjust. This doesn't mean you become a mind reader. It means you become a mood reader. You walk into a conversation not thinking, what do I want to say? But asking, what's already being felt here? That shift alone makes you magnetic. Because most people just talk. Few people tune in. Let's talk about Megan. She worked in a hospital, not as a doctor, but as a patient liaison. Her job wasn't to solve problems. It was to sense where comfort was needed. One day, a surgeon stormed past her, frustrated. Megan didn't ask questions. She brewed coffee, brought it in quietly, and placed it on his desk with no words. 10 minutes later, he said, "You're the only one who noticed I wasn't okay today." That's emotional fluency. It speaks through actions, not explanations. Emotional fluency also means knowing when not to lighten the mood, when not to offer advice, when not to smile. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is match someone's emotional state. Not to stay there forever, but to help them feel less alone in it. You learn this through observation. Notice body language. Are shoulders tight or relaxed? Is eye contact present or absent? Is a room buzzing or stiff? Emotional fluency means you enter a space like a guest, not with assumptions, but with sensitivity. And that makes people want to include you. Here's the mistake many people make. They push their energy onto a moment without reading the moment first. They tell jokes in grief. They pitch solutions before sensing the problem. They walk in like a spotlight when a room needed a candle. Emotional fluency requires humility. You ask the room, silently, how can I best show up here? This matters in leadership too. Emotionally fluent leaders don't just give orders. They feel morale. They don't just assign tasks. They sense burnout. They walk the floor and notice who's hiding behind fake smiles. They don't need a report to see what's going on. They already know. And that's why people trust them, because they feel seen before they even speak. But this doesn't only apply in crisis or leadership. Emotional fluency is everyday influence. It's a parent sensing their child's silence isn't from tiredness, but from hurt. It's a partner realizing that I'm okay at dinner means I'm overwhelmed. It's a friend who shows up without being asked, saying, you crossed my mind. No fanfare, just attunement. Most emotional signals are missed not because they're hidden, but because we're rushing. Let silence hang. Watch people more closely. Listen with your body, not just your ears. Pay attention to what shifts when you enter. Did the room brighten or dim? Did the conversation pick up or stall? Your presence is part of the atmosphere. Also, check your own state. You can't read others clearly if you're emotionally blurry. The more grounded you are, the sharper your perception. It's like wiping fog from a mirror. You see not only yourself, but others more clearly. And finally, practice curiosity. When something feels off, don't rush to fix. Just wonder. I wonder what they're carrying today. I wonder if that smile was for real. I wonder if there's more beneath that yes. That kind of quiet inquiry changes the way you relate to others, not as problems to solve, but as stories to unfold. Because here's the truth. Most people are longing to be understood without having to explain. And when you become someone who listens before they speak, someone who senses before they ask, your influence grows effortlessly. Not because you demanded space, but because you created it. So read the room, not to manipulate it, but to care for it. Tune in, not to gain power, but to earn trust. When you become emotionally fluent, people feel safer around you. And safety, more than charm, more than charisma, more than talk, is what makes people listen. Emotional fluency isn't about speaking many languages. It's about understanding the one everyone wishes they could say out loud. I want to be seen. I want to be understood. I want to feel safe here. And when you can hear that without a word, you've already become the most influential person in the room.